you this morning? And it was like 3 o'clock, and at least down in Detroit, it should be. So that was it. It was, I said evil, but it was like a north wind's coming in.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, from these last few fronts, when I see like, this one on my app or whatever, it shows that, Thursday it's supposed to be 30, whatever. I start looking the day before, because the day before the high is supposed to be like 60, is what it said. And then I looked and it's like, yeah, at midnight it's supposed to be 60, and then drop in temperatures the rest of the day. So, when's the thing actually coming in? But a sugar pick me up. Yeah, them boys will eat. He'll eat one. That boy there in the corner, he'll eat enough for all three of them. You gotta get more than one. Grab a couple. Yeah, go ahead and grab. He wants it. Go ahead, grab a couple. It's right behind you. I didn't know, Roger. I wasn't talking about you. I was talking about him. Roger came from a big family, whereas if you didn't grab it, you didn't eat. Yeah, just start throwing them. Yeah, Dennis is like, I'll just keep them here, and that way if somebody comes in late, we can get them some cookies. Yeah. All right, prayer requests.
Remember Claude Stein in prayer.
Claude Stein.
He's not, he asked for prayer. He's not feeling well. I don't know exactly what he has or anything.
Gotcha. David said he didn't get any back there, Jennifer. Yeah, he's fixing to cut me off if you don't get him one. There he is. Don't send it with Roger either. There won't be any that make it back there. Roger just about grabbed another one while she walks by.
Thanks, man. They're very good.
Yeah.
It don't matter, Jennifer. You've been on the camera before. You just don't know it.
Yeah. Anybody heard from Brenda lately?
Brenda Hens,
Yes.
she sent me a text. Our daughter's home and doing good now, but she spent all that time with her, and she's kind of been just down on her back and stuff.
Yeah.
But otherwise, everything's
Good. Hey, David. David, can you kill this sound without it messing you up? Thanks. Anybody else?
Just been prayer for me. I know I've got several family members that's got COVID,
And the school.
and the schools. Just been prayer for. It's going to be something that looks like everybody's going to get sooner or later.
Yeah.
So just been prayer for those.
Yeah.
Right now, it's like you got COVID going on, you got flu going on. Now then, it's like a 24-hour bug, and that's what's keeping like a lot of the kids out.
Mm-hmm.
It's not the fact that the kids have the COVID. Parents may have got it from somebody, but then the kids has to be off for 5 days.
Right.
And then by the time they hop 5 days, well, the little rascal has got a stomach.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
I know my family, I have 2 siblings and a niece and 2 nephew and 2 nieces all at one time. We're all down at one time.
Yeah.
It's just going around.
Yeah. I'm hoping and praying that we can keep the crew that's going on the parenting retreat this weekend healthy to be able to get everybody there. So just remember remember them in prayer, and certainly remember the weekend in prayer. So. All right. Dennis, would you mind leading us in prayer?
Father, I come to you tonight in Jesus' name. I want to thank you for the opportunity to be here. Thank you for your grace and your love that you show us each day. Father, we've got prayer requests with you. None of this has caught you by surprise, Lord. Sickness, everything that goes on. Father, I pray that you would give us wisdom in this. Seek your guidance in everything that we do. Pray that you be with Tony tonight as he brings your word to us, that we might have a better understanding of that. Guide us now, take us out the rest of this week. Help us, Father, to be a good witness for you. It's in the best in Jesus' name.
Amen. All right, 1 Samuel 13. Last week we were talking, kind of going through Saul's military history, and last week he was taking sacrifices into his own hands, didn't wait on Samuel, and offered the burnt offering, was going to offer the burnt peace offering, didn't offer the burnt offering, and Samuel shows up and asks what he's doing, and we talked about that last week, and then Samuel saying that because in that he's now not going to have align his lineage for kingship, and Israel is going to end. And so we ended in verse 15. Samuel arose, went up to Gilgal, to Gibeah of Benjamin. Saul numbered the people that were present with him, about 600 men. And we talked at length about how that 600, it's kind of moving us, introducing us into this next passage. Also, in our minds, it kind of connects us a little bit because of the number with the 300 that God used in the past in Israel's history for victory. And in doing that, the number of the people were too many, and got it all the way down to 300. The reason that we want to bring that to our minds is because we're fixing to get into some battle scenes, and we want to think through what's really going on here in terms of the big picture in relation to that. So, verse 16, Saul and his son Jonathan and the people who were present with him were staying in Gibeah of Benjamin, while the Philistines camped at Michmash. Now, the raiders came from the camp of the Philistines in 3 companies. One company turned toward Ophrah to the land of Shaul, and another company turned toward Beth Horon, and another company turned towards the border which overlooks the valley of Zibeum toward the wilderness. Now, if you looked at that on a map, it's kind of weird the way that is, because they're all camped together, and then they send them out in troops, and they send them in 3 different directions. But it's those 3 different directions. They're actually, it looks like they're sending them away from Saul and the rest of the army. So when you read it, if you don't have a picture of it in your mind, think of it kind of like, and the mileage isn't right, but think of it like if you've got the Philistines that are in Paris, and you've got Israel that's at Cooper. Well, the Philistines send the group north to Hugo, and they send another group towards Honey Grove, and then they send another group towards Rivercrest. And it's kind of like, we kind of expected this big battlefront. Why aren't the Philistines surrounding the Israelites and going that? Why aren't the Philistines, so that's kind of raised the question. So Why is it looks like they're sending them away and they're only keeping a limited number at Michmash? Why are they doing that? What was the number of the Philistines? Do you remember from 13, earlier in 13?
They had like 30,000 chariots.
Yeah, like 30,000 chariots. How many? Saul numbered the people, and there how many?
600 for Saul.
So why would we waste our military on 600 people? You know, I mean, really, why would we waste our? We can send them out in troops and bands, and they can go make raids, and we can be more productive. Israel is a side note. Okay, now stop and think about this a little bit, because at this point with the Philistines, Israel is basically a side note. Philistines don't recognize Yahweh as God. They don't recognize or see other than earthly numbers, and so 600 to what they had is nothing. Why would you waste military? Why would you waste military force on that number? It actually doesn't make military sense. The only reason we're wondering why is it that they wouldn't use all of their troops on Israel is because we know the end of the story, and we also believe that God can bring about great victory with limited numbers. Philistines don't think that way, right? They don't think that way. But it's sort of, you got to be careful, because you got to put into question, how is it that you think about numbers in relation to battles that God brings us into, right? You'd be faced with what feels like insurmountable odds, and in the reality, when you put the number on paper, it is insurmountable. That's why I love and use it all the time. I love the story about the pastor's kid that comes home. They ask what he talked about in Sunday school. We talked about the flood. We talked about the flood, and the pastor looked at his boy and said, "What? Don't you believe in the flood?" He's like, "They're talking about world, water covering everything and all this kind of stuff." Well, don't you believe that God could do that? Well, if you put God into the equation, right? But that's true, because God brings us into these moments that if you don't put God into the equation, the numbers don't work in relation to that. This is a big deal as we move forward in the story right here, right now. Okay? So 19, no blacksmith could be found in all the land of Israel, for the Philistines said, otherwise the Hebrews will make swords or spears. So all of Israel went down to the Philistines, each to sharpen his plowshare, his mattock, his axe, and his hoe. The charge was 2/3 of a shekel for the plowshares, the mattocks, the forks, and the axes, and to fix the hoes. So it came about on the day of battle that neither sword nor spear was found in the hands of any of the people who were with Saul and Jonathan, but they were found with Saul and his son Jonathan. Why do you include that? You don't waste space with stuff that doesn't matter, so why do you include that?
I suppose because of what's plenty of
Okay. Yeah. What's this now presenting in our mind when we look at battle? What's it look like to us when you see this? Yeah. The people that he's using, it's like, okay, so you got a military force against farmers. So again, it's kind of like if you know the geography, and I say to you, the Philistines sent a group. Israel is down at Cooper. Philistines sent a group to Hugo. They sent a group to Honey Grove, and they sent a group to Rivercrest. And you're like, well, why did they do that? Saul's down in Cooper. Why wouldn't they go down here to whatever? And then the next thing says, oh yeah, and the Israelites, they have a bunch of hoes and rakes and axes, and they had 2 swords though. Saul had one, and Jonathan had one. So it's like, oh, okay. Philistines don't have to worry about a bunch of farmers, right? Normally that's true. The garrison of the Philistines went out to the pass of Michmash. And the day came, chapter 14, the day came that Jonathan, the son of Saul, said to the young man who was carrying his armor, "Come and let us cross over to the Philistine garrison that is on the other side." But he did not tell his father. Saul was staying in the outskirts of Gibeah under the pomegranate tree, which is in Migron, and the people who were with him were about 600 men. Ahijah, the son of Ahitub, Ichabod's brother, the son of Phinehas, the son of Eli, the priest of the Lord at Shiloh, was wearing an ephod. And the people didn't know that Jonathan had gone. Between the passes by which Jonathan sought to cross over to the Philistine garrison, there was a sharp crag on the one side, sharp crag on the other side. The name of one was Bozez, and the name of the other Seneh. And a crag rose on the north side opposite of Michmash, and on the other side, south opposite of Gibeah. So if you ever see Tombstone, the end of Tombstone, Wyatt Earp's running down the bandits, and they're walking through, and they're riding through what looks like this, almost like an old dried riverbed. On the right side, you got a cliff that comes up 40, 50 feet, 75 feet. On the left side, you got another cliff that goes up 45, 50, 75 feet. And they're walking it, they're riding their horses in it. And as they're riding their horses in it, you know, the unique cinematic effects, the guys start looking up. You know? And it brings your heart to say, this ain't going to turn out well. Because clearly they're at a disadvantage, right? You don't want to be in the bottom of a riverbed between two cliffs when you've got an army above you, right? And all you've got is, you got Jonathan and his armor bearer who are going through this little cleft, or this little crag through the mountainous area. Jonathan said to the young man who was carrying his armor, because Jonathan's the only one who has a sword, "Come, let us cross over to the garrison of these uncircumcised." Circle the word uncircumcised, okay? Circle the word uncircumcised. Because whenever you see or hear that word, these non-covenantal people, right? What does David say whenever he is fixing to and desires to go into battle with Goliath? Goliath is challenging Israel, and everybody is worried. You got, you know, big one, my number one versus your number one. Bring out your number one. We'll get this thing over with. No need for all of us to die, right? And David comes into the camp, and what does David say when this guy comes out? What does he say to his brothers and the rest of Israel? What does he say? "Who is this uncircumcised Philistine? He's not of God. He's not of a covenantal people. Who is this man?" Right? The people saw the might of Goliath. David saw an uncircumcised Philistine. Jonathan sees what? An uncircumcised army. And God's call upon Saul, his father, was to do what? Be at war with, the rest of y'all are going to have to wake up. No cookies for y'all next week. Holy smokes. I mean, that sugar rush is supposed to bring you up for 15, 20 minutes. It's not supposed to immediately ask you. I mean, all y'all are like, where's my milk, for crying out loud? Making Dave work way too hard tonight. I don't even know where I was at. Jonathan just sees an uncircumcised army. What were they supposed to be about? What was his father supposed to be about? On a campaign against these uncircumcised people. Jonathan says, let's go, him and his armor bearer, to these uncircumcised people. Saul doesn't know about it. His dad doesn't know about it. Just like a kid runs out without his dad knowing about it. Right? And now look at the middle of 6. Perhaps the Lord will work for us, for the Lord is not restrained to save by what? Many or by few. See, Jonathan looks at this and he says, there's two things here that you have to take these two things in this particular battle into the equation. One is, this is an uncircumcised people. And the second is, the numbers are against us. That's what everybody's thinking, even the Philistines are saying and thinking, numbers are against us, numbers are against us, numbers are against us. But he brings into the equation, the Lord's hand is not limited based upon numbers. So perhaps, he's not saying, so let's go confront hell with a water gun. That's not what he's saying. He's saying, so perhaps, if by military you would look at this and you would say, wait a minute, they're bigger, they're greater, they're stronger, it's not great military strategy to go into this battle like this. But Jonathan takes into the equation and he says, but wait a minute. God's put us on campaign, and I'm the king's son. God's put us on campaign to purposed us to go and push out the Philistines. And number two, you can't look at this as a numbers thing because God's hand isn't restrained based upon numbers. So if you didn't take those two things into account, you'd be shaking in your boots saying, whoa, no. But you have to take those into account. If you're a covenantal people, you have to take those into account. Otherwise, guess what? You're not going to cross over to go wage war in the battle. And so he does.
Kind of interesting, though, that he goes to check them out, something like Gideon did, too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
In other words, by what they say. Another thing I thought was kind of interesting is that he's out there fighting the battle, which Saul's supposed to be doing. Saul's sitting underneath the pine.
You have to put, in your margins, you have to put, Jonathan is the foil, the contrast to Saul. Most of the time, the two of them are never contrasted, but Jonathan is constantly is the contrast to Saul. Now we know this is going to rise up, because what are we not going to be able to say whenever David becomes king? You're not going to be able to raise your hand and say, well, it's because Jonathan was unfit. Can't really say that. Jonathan is what we would say old school, a stud, right? He was the man in most every way that you could see. And so you see that. So his armor bearer said to him, do all that is in your heart. What you're going to have is this interaction, okay? You're going to have an interaction. Right now you're in the middle of Jonathan and the people who are fighting with him. This happens to be just one single person, okay? And then we're going to have Saul, and we're going to have the people who are fighting with him, which is namely all of Israel. So you're going to see some things that are in common, but then you're going to see some things that are in contrast, right? So Jonathan's armor bearer says, hey, let's do it. He is an unnamed person of faith. He is an unnamed person of faith. Because if it's me, and if I wasn't I've got to take into the equation the same thing that Jonathan takes into the equation, or otherwise I'm going to look at Jonathan and say, are you insane? Let's go and get your father, the king. Let's go inquire of God. Let's go get a better army, and let's go do this a different way. So the armor bearer is the unnamed person of faith. It says, do that all is on your heart, and says, I am with you according to your desire. And I just love that phrase, because the reality is your glory is not based upon the status of how recognized you are by other people. This is another current that's going to come into play. Later on, we're going to find out that Saul has one of the things that Saul has a problem with. Well, it's just, man, I wish we could go there, but it's too early. We'll wait. So Jonathan said, behold, we will cross over to the men and reveal ourselves. If they say to us, wait until we come to you, then we will stand in our place and not go up to them. But if they say, come up to us, then we will go up, for the Lord has given them into our hands, and this will be the sign to us. Now, Jonathan is what's Jonathan doing when he does that?
He's asking God to give him the answer, and he's making a decision.
He is trying to get an answer to the perhaps. I don't know whether God wants us to go up. It can be reckless of us to just go up. Well, God's not limited by numbers. So have you ever been around somebody who's like, well, God's not limited by numbers. Let's just go jump off this cliff, right? God can save us. Can God save you? Yes. But God also put into place an economy called gravity, which means when you jump off that cliff, unless a miracle happens, 9 times out of 9, you're going to do what? Go splat. Yeah. Right? God hasn't called us to go set up a tent on, Dallas Freeway and say, well, God can protect us. Can He? Yes, of course He can. But God also put traffic in place, right? He's answering perhaps, right? But in answering perhaps, He's entering into that because He's put into the equation God. This is the economy of God. So it's not outside the realm of God for Him to do work just this way. It's really not outside the realm of how He works. We just don't know if that's how He's wanting to work right now with us. So what does He do? He's inquiring of God as to whether or not they should or should not go. Right? He's inquiring of God as to whether they should or should not go. And in doing so, it's interesting because He doesn't take the easy route. He says what? He says, if they come down, if the Philistines come down, then what? Yeah, it's no good. We won't fight. We won't fight. When they say we'll stay, we'll find a hole to hide in. Okay? But if they say, yeah, come on up, which humanly speaking is what they should say, but for Jonathan, it's the harder of the two options, right? It's the harder of the two things. You almost would expect that that's what they would say. But that also gives you a little bit of insight into what Jonathan is thinking. It's like David when he comes and he sees this uncircumcised Philistine and he's saying, I know odds seem insurmountable, but this is the purpose that God has called us to do and be about. So it makes more sense, even though the numbers aren't in our favor, for us to be going and doing this. But I can't just go into that recklessly. Now, anybody who doesn't know what's going on, the intricacies of it, anyone that looks at it from the outside and says, this is a really reckless thing. But Jonathan isn't being reckless in what he's doing. He's being very calculated in the way that he is approaching God in the purpose of God that He has called him to do. So it's like Jonathan is saying, it's not a question as to whether or not the purpose of God on my life and on King Saul's life, my father, is to drive out the Philistines. That is a purpose that He's called us to do. So I'm not outside any sort of will of God. In doing that, And in approaching this situation, I can't say that I'm outside the will of God just because the numbers aren't in our favor. Traditional wisdom would say, and we see this even with Christ in the New Testament, he says, a wise king will do what before he goes to war? He will look out and say, how big's that army? And then he'll look and he'll say, how big's my army? And then he'll decide whether or not he needs to ask for terms. Well, Jonathan's done that, but he said, within the pattern that God has given Israel up until this point, for these numbers to be off is not an abnormal thing. It's actually a normal thing. So let's see what God chooses and decides to do. If they do what would be normal, which is harder on us, call us up to climb these cliffs, then we'll know God's saying, move forward, young man. If they say, hey, we'll come to you, then we know we're going to find a place to spot to hide, as far as that goes. I was reading a few days ago. Man has within his heart, man has within his mind the desires of his heart, the direction in which he wants to go. God sets forth every decision. At the end of the chapter, that's a Tony translation. At the end of the chapter, he says, the lot is cast, and every decision is of the Lord. The lot that we'll read it. Proverbs. It's in Proverbs. I'm making David work back there because I didn't tell him we were going to go here. Proverbs 16 and the verse 33. He says, the lot is cast into the lap, but every decision is from the Lord. Yeah. Does God control every dice that is rolled in Vegas? He does. He does. That's not an endorsement for y'all to go gamble, okay? God has sent me across the river, right? Why? Tony said so. No, Tony did not say so. Yeah, it's exactly right. It's exactly right. But see, Jonathan believes these things. I desire the direction from God. I understand the purpose of God. I understand the economy of God in relation to numbers and the way in which God's work. I see the pattern of God in the way that He has worked. All of these things seem to be lined up, but we're going to cast the dice because I believe that every decision also belongs to God. So He's calling out to God in terms of perhaps we should go. Should we go? God, yes or no? If they call out to us, come up, we're going to go up. If they say, we're coming down to you, then it's not of God. And he trusts and believes that. And so that's the plan.
It also shows that he's going up and having to climb just the trust that he has in God.
Yeah, Jonathan's not looking for an easy way out. He's not looking, all of it lines up for him. He's not looking for an easy way out. It's just because he has a firm grasp on the economy of God at what seems like a pretty young age. Yeah.
Did he leave the others there to begin with because he was just curious, or was it because that they weren't doing anything?
Probably yes. Probably yes. Yeah, it's we've already had a dividing of the troops, 3,000 and 1,000, right? Because remember, Saul had 3,000 and Jonathan had 1,000 in terms of troops before, and so there's been some sort of responsibility that's been handed over to Jonathan in terms of the second in line, and purposes that we're called to do. And there's also never any rebuke from Saul in relation to Jonathan doing, per se, what he did. Yeah. But it's interesting because he didn't, I'm holding that part of the reason that he didn't go to Saul is because the narrative that God is bringing out in this is the contrast between him and Saul. So Saul does a lot of good things, but at this point Saul is not. It's meant to be showing this contrast between him and Saul. So if God had directed him to go to Saul and Saul give him his blessing, then the whole story would be totally different. The way you viewed all of this between Saul and Jonathan would be totally different. But that's not what's happening. You're seeing just a total distinction between Jonathan and Saul.
More on himself and his others, other than Jonathan.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah, and so we're just seeing that he's the writer is wanting to bring out this contrast. Most of the time, we sort of hone in on the specifics of the story, and we kind of just look at these specifics. But really, I think what the writers really want to get across is here you have Saul, here you have Jonathan. Look at the difference between these two people. Jonathan and his father headship should be this way. He's got every opportunity and anointment to be this way, but he's not this way. Jonathan, who has what we can foresee throughout his whole entire life, has no reason to really be this way other than he's a true covenantal, hesed, love, loyal to God. You don't give up a kingdom unless you love God for somebody else. You see a bigger kingdom, and you see a bigger king than even your dad. And that's an amazing thing. If you stop and think about that, that's an amazing thing. Because there's meant to be this huge connection and bond between father and son, and but Jonathan is what a covenant person should be. That God is even greater than that bond. Yeah.
He didn't want notoriety for himself.
Mm-hmm.
And I just noticed when we just read this just now, he was the better leader too, because one armor bearer, and he's just pretty much got him to do whatever he tells him to do.
Blessed are the poor, blessed are the meek, blessed are the... When we go to the parent, of course, my head's there because we got 8 hours of teaching that we're doing and training, but good parenting gets kids to the point in which they want to follow. There's a desire for them to follow. They don't follow because you said you have to. And so Jonathan embodies that. It's a great point, Jennifer, because Jonathan embodies people who want to follow him. David has to wield the sword. What did Saul say whenever he first battle? He said, chops up an ox and says, if you don't do this, you're going to become like it. Yeah. Yep. So both of them revealed themselves to the garrison of the Philistines. Verse 11, the Philistines said, behold, Hebrews are coming out of the holes where they have hidden themselves. So they said, hey, this is what we want. The Hebrews have been in hiding. Now they're coming out. This is our chance. That's what the Philistines are thinking. So the men of the garrison hailed Jonathan and his armor bearer and said, come up to us. We will tell you something. My translation of that is, come on up. We got something for you. You know, that cocky kid we got something for you. I love watching, I don't obviously watch the fights. Most of them are pay-per-view now, but, they got those UFC fights and whatnot. I love watching the clips of the guys that are all cocky, dancing, come on. And then that guy just TKOs them, and he's laying down. And that guy just turns around and walks to his corner, Philistines saying, come on up, we got something for you. Jonathan said to his armor bearer, "Come up after me, for the Lord has given them into the hands of Israel." Then Jonathan climbed up on his hands and his feet with his armor bearer behind him, and they fell before Jonathan, and his armor bearer put some to death after him. The armor bearer who had no armor. Right? So it's the no name, but the person who does his job and follows Jonathan because he has loyal love just like Jonathan. What does God give him? He gives him victory as well. He gives him victory as well. The first slaughter which Jonathan and his armor bearer made were about 20 men within about a half a furrow in an acre of land. So, he's like, oh, that's not many. It's 10 to 1, And these aren't weaklings. These are massive, mighty men of war. When you watch these old medieval movies, and you look at that man, he's got scars all over his face. This big, old, bulky armor guy, and he's coming to war, and he's got that scar that goes from here all the way down. You know what that tells you? This is one bad dude, because he's still alive after that, right? So put 10 of them up against Jonathan, or put 15 against Jonathan and 5 against the armor bearer. Either way, if God doesn't give them victory, the victory's not going to be had. But He does. So what happens after that? There was a trembling in the camp, in the field, and among all of the people. Even the garrison and the raiders trembled, and the earth quaked, so that it became a great trembling. Now Saul's watchmen in Gibeah of Benjamin looked, and behold, the multitude melted away, and they went here and there. Saul said to the people who were with him, "Number now." Now see what he's doing again? He's numbering again. What's just happened? Hold on, what's just happened here? Our count was 600. Number them again. Let's see exactly what's happened. Number now and see who's gone from us. And when they had numbered, behold, Jonathan and his armor bearer were not there. Saul said to Ahijah, "Bring the ark of God here," for the ark of God at that time was with the sons of Israel. While Saul talked to the priest, the commotion in the camp of the Philistines continued and increased. So Saul said to the priest, "Withdraw your hand." Why was he bringing the ark there? What was Saul doing there? Why would he bring the priest and the ark? He sees this battle. Who's here? Who's not? All accounted for except Jonathan, his armor bearer. Bring the ark. Bring the priest. Bring the ark. Well, but then some time transpires there while they're coming, and more Philistines are scattering, and he says, "Never mind." In essence, when he says, "Withdraw your hand," he says, "Never mind." What was he doing?
Was he concerned about Jonathan?
He is doing what Jonathan did, but he is asking wanting to ask God whether they should go or not go. Do we go or do we not? Do we go or do we not? But as he sees them scatter more and more, what does he say? Never mind. Never mind. See where he's looking? It looks like I'm really wanting direction from God as to know whether or not. No, that was Jonathan. Because when Saul does this, he does it at the beginning. And oh, by the way, this is interesting. My son is over there fighting, which is what God's called me to do. And the Philistines are scattering, which means it looks like they're going to have victory. But I don't know, should we go or should we not go? That's your son over there. Now he's going to have an argument with Jonathan later on that says what? Don't you want this kingdom? But in this moment, he's not willing to go to battle to go save his son. But that increases, and he sees more and more and more and more and more Philistines scattering, killing each other, and all of this. And then he says, what? Oh, never mind. We don't need to know whether or not God's saying go or not.
Well, here, does he believe that, he has to have a vision of God before he can believe that God will answer what he's asking?
Saul is always looking to what he can visually see in order to decide what he should do.
So that's why even with the ark
And we'll see this in the next chapter or two. Saul is a big man who wants to be big, but in his heart he's small.
So when he said, oh, never mind, he was saying it's going to go without God helping him.
He's saying, oh, what I can see is no, we don't need to ask from God. God's given this to us. David, there's that time in which David goes out with the Philistines, go on raids, doesn't inquire of God. No, we're going to go do it. When David does this with Nahor, is it Nahor, and his wife, who's his wife, Abigail? Yeah. And the men come back. He sends the men over there and says, hey, Nabal. Yeah. Anyway, one of them guys, her husband. And they're protecting his shepherds. What was it? Jennifer knows. Oh. Mr. Abigail. There you go. Mr. Abigail. And those shepherds come back. His watchman came back and said, oh, yeah, hey, they're not going to give us any meat. And David says, we're going to go kill them. It's what they deserve. And she staves it off. And he is like, God blessed me with you because you stopped me from doing a bad thing. Saul wasn't really interested in for the right purposes and reasons. Is God want us to go or does he not want us to go? But people, be careful on how you judge things. And that's one of the things this is bringing out. Be careful how you judge things. Careful how you make appraisals. We need to make appraisals 100% absolutely, but we can make them wrong. I've seen people who you tell them the gospel story and they say, I want to trust Christ. And they say a prayer and they leave and you say, yeah, that was fake. Yeah, that was fake. And you have another person that comes and they're weeping and they're crying and they're, I want to trust Christ. I need to trust Christ. I need God. 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 And you walk them through that, and they elated, and you're just like, man, God's done. It's just amazing, and they never darken the door of the church again. You talk to them about God, and you see what they want, and you see what God says, and they say, I don't give a flip about God. I want what I want. See, they may sit there, and they may say certain things, but their heart is far from me, right? So Saul knows outwardly how this has to play out. It's supposed to play out. But he does things that show you that says there's something amiss here. Yeah.
Saul is just like what the people wanted.
Sure.
They got what they visualized. A big man, he looked like the answer.
Play acting, hypocrisy is play acting. So when you see an actor, he becomes who that character is, right? So Paul play acts. It's not the essence of who he is. What were you going to say, Dave?
Some wanted to be Saul.
Yeah.
He wanted a kingdom without money.
Yeah.
He wanted it all set up for him, and he could play the role.
Yeah. Yep. He wanted big. He wanted to be big. But see, in his heart, he didn't feel big. There's a huge psychological thing that goes on here. You ever met that person that's just so, they're just so loud and out front, and you're just like, man, that guy is so cocky and so confident, and so that you realize that most of those people are the least confident people in the world because they play act. They go to the other extreme in doing it. Yeah. So he says, okay, yep, send him away. Withdraw your hand. Then Saul and all the people who were with him rallied and came to the battle, and behold, every man's sword was against his fellow, and there was great confusion. Every man's sword was against his fellow means that the Philistines are fighting against each other. Yeah, because he made a point to say, Israel has no swords. Right? Now the Hebrews who were with the Philistines previously, who went up with them around in the camp, even they also turned to be with the Israelites who were with Saul and Jonathan. Now when all the men of Israel who had hidden themselves in the hill country of Ephraim heard that the Philistines had fled, even they pursued them closely in battle. So this is interesting, because what caused Saul to offer burnt offering sacrifices, and he was going to offer peace offering sacrifices? Why did he do that? Because all of the people were scattering from him. And he's worried because I ain't got any men to go fight in the battle. Now Jonathan, two men go up, and the entire Philistine army is on the run, and now all of a sudden what's happening? All the men are coming out of the holes they were hiding in. All the Israelites are coming in holes that they were hiding in to go join the army. Yeah. So the Lord delivered Israel that day, and the battle spread beyond Beth Haven. There's a principle in Scripture that says, really focuses, that has you and I focus on the things that God has purposed for us to do. And don't get sucked into a vortex of distractions. Early on, the writer made a very explicit point. Saul, go do everything that you find your hand to go do, which is namely go and battle against the Philistines, and trust in God and follow God into that battle. And he is continually being distracted by what seems like all of these true, legitimate hardships and trials and things. It's not set up perfect. It's not set up perfect. It's not set up easy. It's not an easy road, right? Jonathan sets aside those distractions in the sense that he says, no, God works in certain ways through hardships, and we have to realize that, because if we don't, we're going to get lost and lose our purpose and our focus. And it's overstated some ways because it's not then heard or understood. Trust in the Lord with all your heart. Lean not into your own understanding. In all thy ways, it doesn't just mean acknowledge Him in the sense of, yeah, God's there. No, in all thy ways, I see God above all of this. And He will make your paths what? Straight. So here's where I'm going. There's a bunch of distractions with these exit ramps. But I'm looking to the purpose and plan of God. I'm focusing my love on God. Therefore, I'm trusting in Him, and therefore, this is a very, in the wilderness wanderings, this is a straight line in the purposes of God. This is a straight line. So, 24, the people were hard pressed. Israel was hard pressed on that day, for Saul had put the people under an oath, saying, "Cursed be the man who eats food before evening, and until I have avenged myself on all my enemies. So none of the people tasted food. All the people of the land entered the forest, and there was honey on the ground. So Saul says, right, hey, Philistines are scattering, right? We don't need the ark anymore, no problem. We don't need to ask from God anymore. We're supposed to go. You come with me, and nobody eats until my enemies are avenged of me. Right? That's what he says. So he gets the people to follow, just like what Jennifer said earlier, he gets the people to follow through threats, through wielding of power. You follow me because I said so. And you don't eat because I said so. If you do, you will die. Right? Well, they're coming back from this battle. There's honey in the forest. No man put his hand to his mouth because the people feared the oath. If I do that, it's going to get me killed. Okay? Jonathan had not heard when his father put the people under the oath. So he put the end of the staff that was in his hand, dipped it in the honeycomb, put his hand to his mouth, and his eyes were brightened. Then one of the people said, your father strictly put people under oath, saying, cursed be the man who eats today. And the people were weary. Jonathan said, my father has troubled the land. See how my eyes have brightened because I tasted a little of this honey? It's a pretty strong statement saying what my father did wasn't wise. He is the king after all. Now, stop, hold on just a second, because this is going to come into play later on, next week probably. Do the people do what Saul tells them to do? They do. The people do what Saul tells them to do. Because if they don't, they're afraid of what happens next. Okay? Yeah, this is going to come into play next week. Y'all have probably seen the movie A Few Good Men. There's a trial scene that comes up with Tom Cruise is in it, Nicolas Cage. And Cruise goes up, Nicolas Cage is the big general, and he makes a big point to say, everybody does what I say to do. They don't disobey orders. They do what I say to do. If they don't, they die. And these guys that are on trial were under his command. And part of the trial he says, well, these guys did what they weren't commanded to do. And Cruz says, hold on just a minute. You just got through saying that nobody does what they weren't commanded to do. So how can you say that you didn't command these guys to go harass this fellow soldier? Well, guess what? Saul's fixing to here in a little bit go, my soldiers did what they were supposed to do. You know what Samuel's going to come in here and do? Said, I don't think so. So you have storyline here that says people do what Saul commands them to do. Right? Jonathan didn't know it. So Jonathan had partaken of it. Now, verse 30, and we'll end here. How much more if only the people had eaten freely today of the spoil of their enemies which they found? For now the slaughter among the Philistines has not been. Yeah. This would be a great victory. But my father made a rash vow in saying, don't eat until my enemies have been avenged. So they didn't get to taste of the spoils. Oh, by the way, Saul set out. He was worried about Samuel not showing up and the people were leaving. And it says, we read this last week, it says that he set out to offer the burnt offering and the, do you remember what it said? peace offering. A peace offering says that we are at peace with God. A peace offering, if you remember in Leviticus, is that sacrifice that you made that had to totally be eaten in 24 hours, which means it's a festive time in which we are thankful for the blessings of God. And you know what the passage says? I intentionally didn't point it out. Do you know what the passage said? Saul offered the burnt offering and Samuel showed up. It doesn't say anything about the peace offering ever gotten. And now Saul comes in on the day of battle and says, nobody eats until my enemies are avenged. And Jonathan didn't hear of it. Jonathan does. Next week we're going to find it gets so bad that and so Jonathan says, this would have been a great victory. But because of that vow, now it's not. Because we weren't able to enjoy the blessings of God. See, here's one of the things you got to remember. The battle is the Lord's, and this is the amazing thing about God. The battle is the Lord's, and He calls us into His battles. Normally, He also then gives us the blessings of the loot. And when we are eating of those blessings, we give glory to who? God, because it was His battle, and it was the battle that we see that He won. And then we can truly enjoy the blessings that He's given us. But two things. If we are not able to be grateful or don't choose to be grateful for the blessings of God, then guess what? It's not a good day, it's a bad day. It's not a good day, it's a bad day. And so Saul is just churning over this mulch. And you're getting the whiff of that decay from it. An Israelite, before he went to war, if he was newly married, was commanded to stay home for a year. 2 reasons. One, he was able to establish a home. He was able to establish a means to provide for his family. And 2, he had the availability to enjoy his wife. Because in order for that man to be able to truly fight, he had to truly experience the blessings of God. If you struggle being an Eeyore, it's good that you have that struggle, because Christians shouldn't be Eeyore. So we have to look up and recognize the bounty and the beauty that God has given us, even while still recognizing there are things that He restricts in our lives. Yeah. So it's interesting that this comes in. All right, let's pray. Father God, grateful for your word, grateful for the time we can spend in your word, and just reflecting and seeing through all of the things that you're doing in the life of Israel and her history, and just your graciousness, and even just revealing and showing us these things. And so, Father, may it encourage us, one, to, from this passage, look up and see what a true leader is. In any of the battles that we face, appraise it based upon your economy. View numbers from your economy. Pray to you before we move forward. And then, Father, when you do give us victories in the battles that you've called us to and into, may you bless us, and may we see and taste, experience the greatness of those blessings and enjoy them, because you give them so that we might enjoy them. And so may we never get so caught up in the battle that we don't experience the joy of the blessing from the battle. And you're gracious, God, in that way, and we are grateful to you. You are greatly to be praised. All these things we pray through your Son's holy name. Amen.
That was Jack Nicholson.
Yeah,